At the very same time, it's also clear that, degrees and qualifications do not automatically translate into better skills and better lives of people. You can see that in some countries, university graduates have great difficulties finding a job, and at the very same time, employers cannot find the people with the skills they need. Look at the share of employers facing recruitment difficulties, even in countries like Japan, also India, Brazil. It's a lot we need to do. Formal degrees and qualifications are not the answer. We need to understand better what knowledge and skills drive economic and social outcomes. And one thing is clear, the modern world no longer rewards people just for what they know. No? Google knows everything. But it rewards people for what they can do with what they know. That's become the differentiator. It's about learning the right mix of skills. But how do we learn it? What are the most effective and efficient ways to acquire skills throughout life, in a lifelong and life-wide process? How can we integrate the world of education with the world of work? How can economies and labor markets actually utilize their skill potential? It's a big, big question in our economies. How can we extract value from the skills that people have? And last but not least, how do we decide, how do we share the costs and benefits of skill development? Who should pay for what, when and how? Very, very important questions that we will be able, that we need to answer in this case. Let me sort of show you the framework in which we think about those questions. Of course, it has to do with the development of relevant skills, making sure that our societies have access to the right skills, but also making sure that we can activate the skills that are available, that they get recognized, used. And last but not least, putting skills to their most effective use. It's about matching supply and demand of skills. Let me talk you through these things in a bit more detail based on the results of our evidence. The biggest question today is, how do we understand the changing demand for skills? In 2014, The Economist had this cover suggesting that, about 50% of the work in the US labor market could probably be digitized with today's technology. And the dilemma for educators is that the kind of things that are easy to teach, maybe with a test, are precisely the kind of things that are also easy to digitize, automate, and outsource. This is not just about robots taking over whole factories. That's one factor, but not everything. Today you can have a car without a driver getting through the dense traffic of Bangkok without an accident, without human intervention. What's that going to do to tomorrow's jobs in our economies, our societies? It's no longer about some factory being automated somewhere. It's about what's happening in your neighborhood, in your street, right in front of you. Think about augmented reality. We're now able to bring the world's complete knowledge into everything we do in real time, integrating what we know, what the world knows. Huge impact. And again, one of the implications is that the world will no longer reward us just for what we know, but for what we can do with what we know, activating knowledge. And there's a lot more to come that is going to fundamentally change our societies, our economies. We already see, many people these days complain about, declining productivity in our countries. But in fact, that's not so simple. In fact, in the frontier firms, the firms that are ahead of the curve, that are really, really good, they are actually seeing significantly rising productivity. But where we are not successful in diffusing innovation, diffusing new knowledge, work with very traditional means, there we are seeing declining productivity. So we see how those lines diverge. Some firms racing ahead, becoming richer and richer, others rising productivity, and others actually falling behind. And we see that both in the manufacturing and service sector. How well are we equipped? One of the things that we did in our survey of adult skills is we tested the skills of people directly. One area where we focused on was problem-solving skills. Problem solving in a digital environment. And when we got the results, we found that, in some countries, there's a greater share of adults who are better equipped for the digital world. You look at Sweden, Finland, and the Netherlands, and then other countries like Ireland and Poland, where workers struggle. And here you see the results for the population 16 to 65-year-olds. But even in the most optimistic case, look at Sweden and Finland, we're still only talking about 40% of the workforce who are reasonably ready for the digital age. And I'm not talking about, computer programmers, people using advanced kind of skills here. This is basically about everyday use of technology. And now I'm going to know what you're going to tell me. This is all about older workers not keeping up with change. But actually, if you look at the young population, 16 to 24-year-olds, yes, it does look better, but not as much as you might expect. There are some differences. You look at Korea, for example. In Korea, you see a huge advantage of young people over older generations. This is a country that has progressed very rapidly in equipping people with better skills. But look at the line just above Korea. That's the United States. And there you can see that people entering the workforce are not much better skilled than those leaving for retirement. The skills gap is actually very narrow. Education and training have not very significantly progressed when it comes to those kinds of problem-solving skills. So overall, there's a lot more, even the advanced nations, I'm talking here about nations that have actually quite high in income. There's a lot of homework we have to do to equip more people with better skills to collaborate, compete, and connect. And you can actually see when you look, this is data from the United States actually, that again, there's a decline in the demand for manual skills. This is about the factories that get automated, very clear. But actually the steepest decline in demand is no longer about manual skills. It's about what we call routine cognitive skills. Memorizing something and expecting, that's going to make you successful later in life. What schools used to be very good at, that's actually sort of challenged most significantly. You see a rise in the demand in non-routine analytic skills. It's about creative skills, problem-solving skills, non-routine interpersonal skills, social skills. Very significant changes in the nature of the skills that make people successful. Success today is very much about ways of thinking, creativity, critical thinking, problem-solving, decision-making. It's about ways of working, communication, collaboration, and it is about the tools for working. The hardest part, but I don't think we should, neglect it, is about character qualities. Think about resilience, adaptability, curiosity, initiative, leadership, courage, integrity, mindfulness, self-awareness, empathy. Those kinds of qualities that are hard to capture, hard to measure, but that are of increasing importance to success at work and at life these days. Understanding changing demand for skills is important, but then, how do we respond to this? How do we improve quality and equity in education and training? One of the lessons that we have learned is that it's so important to involve employers in designing curricula and delivering educational programs. Have a look at some of our data here. These data show you the skill levels on the vertical axis for the age group 16 or 25 on the horizontal axis. And I've now divided those people into 4 groups. The red line are the young people who are in education. They start at a high point and they end up better than where they started. So if you are in school or in university, you appear to learn something. But the interesting part is, if you combine education and work, that's the green line. You start a bit lower because typically vocational education and training is not as prestigious as academic learning, but you end up pretty much at the same point. Even people who are just in work see a quite steep progression in their skill levels. The only people in trouble are those who are not in education and not in work. And there you can actually see they end up worse than where they started. That's very important, you know. Skills that we do not use, we actually lose. If young people don't get a chance to get employed, actually we risk that they sort of lose what they had once obtained. Combining education and work, you know, and often we talk about this. These days, you know, people always talk about, you know, apprenticeship as a very, very good way of skill development, and it's true. But not everything that is labeled as an apprenticeship is an apprenticeship in the sense of providing truly work-based learning. And our research shows that it's the work-based learning component that actually makes up much of the quality of apprenticeship. Look at this data here. You go to Germany, for example, you can see basically apprenticeship is really about, you know, a very significant share of work-based learning. But, you know, you go to England and Northern Ireland, and there you can see, you know, is actually a very, very small share of people in apprenticeships who actually do participate in work-based learning. So, you know, let's be careful about the labels. Let's look at what actually happens. To what extent work-based learning occurs. Judge programs based on that, and you can see huge differences here. I want to reiterate one other element, and that is about integrating work-based learning systematically into whatever we call vocational education. And that's, we call it the mandatory principle. Not sort of adding this on, but making this a critical path. And it's best if it is systematic, if it's credit-bearing, and if it's quality assured. And you can actually incentivize this through funding arrangements. There are a lot of ways how you can do that. It's also important to carefully listen to employers when it comes to the content of curricula and the qualifications, to guide the adaptation to emerging requirements, to develop qualifications and workplace training arrangements, and so on. Sometimes, you know, vocational education is very narrowly focused on current skill requirements, on specific occupational classes. It helps people get into a job, but it's not so good when people change their jobs. So it's important to build transversal skills in the vocational programs, ensuring that, you know, people also develop the foundations that it's going to help them, you know, change their job, grow in that job. You can see that here. Basic graduates of vocational programs have often much weaker foundation skills than graduates of academic programs. So there's a lot vocational education and training can actually improve here. You need to ensure that the institutions and mechanisms to engage employers represent the diverse perspectives and opinions within employer groups. And that's not trivial because, you know, employers are not employers, firms are not firms. They may have very different interests and views of what is important, how to train people. So recognizing those differences in views and perspectives is very, very important in the design of instructional system. And last but not least, you know, you need to find the appropriate role for government that helps students and balances the perspectives of employers, unions, and the interests of students. So it's sort of some mechanisms that we have found working really well. You need to share the costs fairly among governments, individuals, and employers. The question of who pays, who benefits. Employers can create a climate that supports learning. Invest in learning. People also must take more responsibility for their skill development throughout their working life, not just in initial education. As governments, we can design financial incentives. We can design favorable tax policies that encourage individuals and employers to invest in training and move up the value chain. You look to Singapore, you know, if you hire low-skilled people as an employer, you end up paying more taxes. So there's a lot of incentive for you to actually move up the value chain. So developing relevant skills in our economies has to do a lot with engaging employers to develop, to help provide the right mix of skills. It has to do with career guidance. Very, very important. Who tells young people the truth? That has to do with providing effective guidance. Now recognize that rapidly evolving jobs and careers have expanded career opportunities. There's a lot more choice available. Choices are becoming harder, more difficult. That's why career guidance is so important. Telling people how the world looks and where their strengths and weaknesses are. Providing reliable, impartial sources of guidance so that young people do not have to, listen just to their neighbors and other informal services. Establish a coherent, and in our view it's important, an independent guidance profession. Often, educators are not so good in providing career guidance. They didn't have first-hand experience in the labor market. Develop sort of qualification system for career advisors. Preserve the independence is a very, very important in our view. And then support guidance with resources, information, good evaluation. All of those elements are really important. Give people good information of where to invest in their skills. Preparing teachers with good industry experience. Encouraging trainers in educational institutions to spend some of their time working in industry. Promoting flexible pathways of recruiting. Providing appropriate pedagogical and other preparation for trainers. Those things really, really matter. Maximizing the use of work-based training. You hear me saying this for the third time, because I really think in your region that is not sufficiently established. It's one of the cruxes. There's a lot of focus on vocational education, but we don't see the place of work as the kind of place where much of that learning really can happen. Using effective tools to engage stakeholders. Transparency, qualification frameworks, all of those instruments are important, and it's those kinds of things that ensure high quality education for all.